So I don't think the choice of camera or shooting format for movies matters as much as many people think. When we talk about cameras or technology, whether it's IMAX, 35mm, 70mm, digital, all the different 2K, 4K, 8K, that's always around the idea of image quality, what makes a better or worse image. But the problem with that idea is I think the idea of image quality is a lot more complicated than megapixels or resolution. So can we say if this image is a better image than this? And on the surface, it might look that one image is technically better than the other image, but images have power in different ways and serve the story in different ways. So I want to sort of look at image quality and the spectacle of image quality from the perspective of the audience experiencing a film, filmmakers creating the film, and the technology that camera manufacturers are trying to sell us, and also to a certain extent cinemas are trying to sell us with large format cinemas and Dolby Cinema, IMAX, all of those things about basically being able to charge more for you to see the film in the perfect format. Could this eternal argument about different cameras and different formats be a distraction from the important stuff of making films, which is, of course, telling a good story? So I'm sometimes guilty of this myself. I'll watch a film that looks stunning and I'm wowed by the spectacle of beautiful images, and I'll go like, I wonder what camera that was shot on. And partially the issue is because I think, well, if I had access to the camera, I could shoot a film that looks like that. But that's forgetting that 95% of the way a film looks is nothing to do with the camera. So one of my favourite films is Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. Now, this film was shot on 35mm Panavision anamorphic, but that's not what makes Blade Runner look like Blade Runner. That's not why it looks brilliant. It looks brilliant because the set design is outstanding. It looks brilliant because the composition that the director and cinematographer made presents beautiful frames. The casting was great. The actors are wearing excellent costumes. They've got brilliant makeup and hair. The lighting is outstanding. And then there's atmospheric effects like smoke and rain and stuff to give texture and depth to the image. And then you add movement to that and you've got a beautiful, beautiful looking movie. And that's not got much to do with the camera. If you swapped the camera on Blade Runner with anything else, even if you put in an iPhone, that image would still look like Blade Runner. Like, it would still, the bulk of what happened on Blade Runner happened in front of the camera. The Blade Runner looks the way it does because of the things that happened on set that day rather than the choice of format. So even if you think about so-called better or lesser formats, IMAX versus digital, 35mm versus 70mm, whatever, they're only tangential to our enjoyment of a movie. And yes, there is a spectacle about watching a beautiful, spectacular image in a cinema that will retain your interest for 5 minutes, and then you get back to just watching the film the normal way you watch a film, which is enjoying the story, focusing on characters, focusing on actor performances, thinking about the structure, the pace of the edit. And if you're watching a beautiful film that fails on story, actor, script, editing, music, sound design, then the beautiful images won't save it. So to overly focus on the technical format is sort of missing the important things. And I've been looking at a lot of the discourse around the Odyssey recently, and it's so focused on the technology that I still don't know what people think overall about the film and the story. Like, it's more focused on the spectacle than the other stuff. Like, that's actually not the most interesting thing about the film. Like, films should be about storytelling and characters and not so much about visual technology. So we've also got to a point that most digital cameras are good enough for the purposes of shooting good quality cinematic images. Most of them can do 4K or above resolution with enough detail and color accuracy to make good quality cinematic images. And it's very hard to tell the different cameras apart. Like, I can't watch a movie and tell you if it was shot on Red, Sony or Arri cameras. Like, the differences are not that obvious. Like, so it wouldn't really matter which camera the filmmaker chose. Like, it wouldn't really change the audience's experience. So the human eye also limits your ability to perceive differences between different cameras. And the main thing is resolution. So there's all this talk about IMAX being 16 or 18K, but the human eye can't perceive that. In a typical cinema, even with a large size screen, you can't see much more than 4K resolution. The human eye is not good enough to process that information. 8K might be perceivable if you're very close to the screen, but then the problem with that is you're very close to the screen and it's going to be uncomfortable and you're going to come out with neck ache. And for most people, the jump between 4K and 8K is very minimal or very hard to see. So that's a thing that if the camera quality isn't easily perceived, then it doesn't matter as much. And it's the same with color. People often talk about cameras as like having different color balances or different color qualities or doing certain colors better. And that's often a thing that you'll hear about in kind of camera circles. But the thing is, the human eye isn't objective about observing color. Like everything we see is processed by our brain. And the reason is because the optic nerve limits the amount of data going through. So the brain has to sort of interpret the images. And we are also interpreting image from a wide variety of circumstances. Like we have day, we have night, we have bright light, we have dark situation. And what we see is not what's going on around us, it's our brain's interpretation of it. And the problem with that is when you look at a camera's image, we're easily fooled. I mean, we actually think when we look at a film that those 24 still frames a second are moving. We perceive movement, but no movement is happening. The eye is easily fooled. It's fooled on both movements and color is not super objective. So choosing a camera because it does a particular color slightly better than another it's a very difficult thing to measure in like the viewing situation in cinema. Like you can measure it in a lab, you can measure it by holding two images up next to each other, but that's not how we watch movies. And that brings me to my next point. What is the point of seeking visual perfection if just having higher resolution results in you being able to see the flaws in the set or makeup or production design? And ultra high resolution images perhaps risk being too perfect and too sterile because many filmmakers choose to shoot on lesser formats or what we would call more degraded images to purposely give their film texture to sort of help storytelling. So if we look at films like Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later, this was shot on mini DV in standard definition, and technically the format is terrible. Like the images are low res, they have poor color, and they have poor detail. But they work really well for the subject because the low resolution means it's hard to see what's going on. The poor color exhibits a kind of sickly effect and the skin tones look slightly off, which works well in a post-apocalyptic world. And the sort of low resolution digitalness of it also kind of has a CCTV effect. So when you look at the wide shots of London, it feels kind of sinister and that the characters being observed through CCTV. It really works to help create the mood of the film, even though technically the format is quite poor. Or we could look at an interesting film like The Excellent Bait by Mark Jenkin. This was shot on standard 16mm, black and white, and it was hand processed using homemade chemicals made by red wine and coffee. And this has imparted a really kind of degraded texture. The film is grainy, that the contrast is uneven, it's quite scratched and dirty because he must have damaged it when he was processing it, and that makes the film look like it's 100 years old or over 100 years old, but the subject is very modern and the location is modern. So it's weird seeing images that look like silent cinema in the modern world, and that disconnect between their two things make the film feel very unsettling. It feels old and new at the same time, and that gives the audience an interesting experience. Or if we look at films like Michael Mann's Collateral, this was an early HD film shot in only 1080p by a camera, the Viper film stream, that has been massively superseded by digital technology now, and at the time was far inferior to 35mm that most movies were being shot at. But the digital texture and the ability to shoot in low light and even the grain of the digitalness kind of gave the film a feel of reality. It didn't look like a movie. It looked like a real city rather than a movie city, and it looked like the characters were real rather than actors. And that level of reality given by a kind of electronic digital look that wasn't glossy, wasn't beautiful, and didn't have a movie effect actually served the story better than something that would have been more aesthetically pleasing. So in conclusion, I don't think the camera choice matters that much. At the high end, it's increasingly difficult to tell cameras apart, and actually, image perfection might not be a thing we want to achieve. Like, the more interesting images are sometimes made with lesser technology or degraded images to make a more textured and more interesting film choice. And then finally, we've not discussed post-production, where an image can be changed and manipulated in post to such a degree that it would be impossible to tell what format it was shot on. So in conclusion, I don't think the camera choice matters. If you're a filmmaker, the best camera is the one you own. Don't worry about the camera you don't have access to, because you can make a good film on any camera. It doesn't really matter. If your film's good, the audiences will enjoy it. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on the topic. Please join me in the comments.